Esta conferencia comenzará a grabarse.
Okay, so we are ready. Sorry, because I cannot share my screen. I will give you, Morgan, the right to share. I hope to be able to do that. I think so. Morgan, do you see the proposal to become presentator? Can you do that?
I did already accept it.
Yes, I see it. The only point is that not in full screen. Could you change to full screen?
Yeah.
No, not yet.
Okay.
In the
because
it's yeah, there.
Here, okay.
Now it's perfect. So thank you very much, Morgan, for joining us today and to help us better understand the kind of projects that are of high interest for you, for your team, for the European Commission, specifically in this case on the mobility, transport, automotive ecosystem. So the floor is yours.
Thank you, Antonio. Good morning, all. So indeed, we are very pleased to do this second presentation for the mobility, transport and automotive ecosystem in the context of Next Generation EU today. And we discussed with Antonio that it would be of particular interest for you to have maybe a presentation which would be more focused on the recent guidelines which have been published mid-September by the Commission on one of the very important tool, which is called the Resilience and Recovery Facility. So this is the purpose of this presentation, and to give you practical and pragmatic insight and examples of how there could be an interaction and contribution from your side with the authorities in charge of preparing and submitting the national plans at member states level to benefit from the funding from this facility. I will quickly go on the main characteristic of this facility to highlight what would be of importance to you, and then really focus on tangible dimensions which you may learn more about, or for which you may have then question to ask. I have tried to make this presentation extremely practical, inspired by already existing good practices and by the publication of the commissions. And there are also a lot of visuals and sources which hopefully you may use if you need to be more involved in this topic. So the first slide here gives you an overview of what this specific tool in Next Generation EU is. So the one which is called, which we commonly call RRF, which is the Recovery and Resilience Facility, which links to the plans to be submitted at national level by member states to the European Commission, and which as you see, represent a huge and unprecedented amount. It's financial support amounting in total to 672 billion euros, both in grants, which means that the European Union will directly finance in subsidy member states for some part of their plans, and in loans up to 360 billion euros. So there is an allocation per country, which you all heard about. That's still important to know that there is a split between grants, direct subsidies, and loans, and to have an idea of the importance of the amount, knowing that behind that, as we already discussed, there has been an investor need assessment performed, which has led to the estimate of this envelope, for which there should be some beneficiaries like companies, SMEs at the end of the day, because these beneficiaries will be financed first by member states, which in turn will get these grants and subsidies or loans. The time frame on the right-hand side is also important because it has been very short. You can see it has started only in May last year. You can see that we are right on time in the time frame, but the final vote is expected in January 2021, which means that the effective launching and implementation can start only on that date, and we will have the final text and final vote only on that date. So that's important to know for you, and also to have an idea of the size of the amount at stake. What is important, this second slide now is showing the implementation timeline, which is different from the previous timeline, which was on the legislative framework and the decision dates for the EU leaders. Here we are showing the timeline which is reflected in these guidelines I mentioned earlier, which has been published by the Commission mid-September, and which really explains to the member states how in practice, this resilience and recovery facility will be implemented. What is important to know is that there are flagship areas for investments and reform in this facility, under this facility, and in particular, you can see here, and that's highlighted by this arrow, that there is a priority which is called recharge and refuel, which address sustainable transport and charging station. And this is more particularly the area where the automotive industry, the transport sector and mobility is concerned. But there are other areas like reskill and upskill here, or connect, sorry, my slides has moved, but also scale up, which deals with digital transition, which are concerned. You would see here, I don't know if you see on the right hand side, this timeline here, which is also very short for the beginning, because the first announcement of resilience plans and recovery plans had already been made in September, October by the member states. I'm referring, for instance, to some member states we already discussed, I think, in these webinars, which are Spain, France, and there are also announcements in Italy, and many other states, member states, Greece, have started to announce their plans, but they are quite very high level announcements for the time being, and we are waiting for the details. We will get the first draft starting mid-October, which means that there are currently a lot of discussions on the field, and that's very important that stakeholders like you are involved. This is why this kind of presentation. And then the start officially will be January 2021, and the deadline for the submission of these plans, so final deadline for all projects to be presented, would be April 2021. At this date, the Commission will start the assessment. And it is planned that already 21-22, 70% of the grants will be committed. with a focus on climate targets for 37%, and a minimum also is provided for digital transition of the expenditures for 20%. So the total amount which we saw in the previous slides will be allocated for 37% to climate targets, and there would be a minimum for 20% of the digital related expenditures, which means that any project which would fit with these priorities could benefit from this share. And one point to be noted is that from the 31 of December 2023, the 30% remaining will be committed. So you see that the time frame is extremely short. The Council in July, when deciding positively on the proposal made by the Commission on this package, asked the Commission to accelerate and facilitate the procedures with the Member States. It's very important in this context that stakeholders and potential ultimate beneficiaries like the industry is involved already at this stage. And we know, for instance, that there are some forums for discussion and tables where the industry meet the authorities to discuss the contents of the plan. That's very important. What can be done in this context with the member states and the authorities, and I would insist that it can be also the local and regional authorities and cities in the context of transport, automotive and mobility ecosystem. The overall framework, which is in the guidance, gives already some insights. The approach is demand driven, so it's important that the member states elaborate tangible projects and proposals and measures on reforms and investments, and they would have to be supported and evidence-based. And the key facts and figures would have to support objectives like the Union's economic, social and territorial cohesion, the resilience, economic and social resilience, and also the impact of the crisis. On this, any stakeholder who is involved can contribute to provide these facts and figures. It's also very important that to notice what are called the country-specific recommendations, which is something arising from what is called the European semester. All the assessment, implementation and delivery of the plans will be made at the level of the European Commission in the context of the European semester. And the European semester every year issues for every country. You can see here on the right-hand side as what are called the country-specific recommendations, which are prioritized challenges to boost the growth potential of the member states' economy and improve their economic and social resilience. The idea would be here to get on a swift implementation of this recommendation. And there you would see on the right-hand side that there are already some areas for transport for some member states which had been identified in 2019. 2019 and 2020 country-specific recommendations will be taken into consideration, and 2019 particularly for the recommendations on which it was assessed that there were only some progress or limited progress in 2020. So that was the 2020 assessment, and I have abstract here on the right-hand side this country-specific recommendation which deals with transport, and you can have a look behind in each country report, which is available on the European Semester 2020 website of the Commission, to have more tangible examples and practical insight about it. On these facts and figures can be provided by the member states to illustrate where the challenges can be addressed, particularly on key value chains and infrastructures, on elements like strategic autonomy, connectivity, activity rates. And these figures and facts, which will support the demonstrations, can be fed, of course, by stakeholders on the field. You will see in the next slide, I have a bit difficulty to scroll, yeah, that you have here more examples for 2020. What is interesting is that for 2020, almost all member states except 2 had the country-specific recommendations in your areas, meaning in the transport. So it's a decline in different wording, but you can see that there is a focus, a clear focus of all country-specific recommendations for all countries on transport, sustainable transport, rail, automotive, or public transport. And it's linked to the digital transition and to the green transition. It's also linked to SMEs, find access to finance, fostering investment, as shown here in terms of policies. And the examples which are applicable to the transport, mobility, and automotive ecosystems and are detailed in the guidelines refers to upskilling, to fostering the research and innovation, to strengthening the resilience, to reduce the greenhouse gas emission. It's also referring to innovative and clean technologies, circular economy, smart grid deployment. These are a lot of examples or mentions which you can find behind all these country-specific recommendations, which are applicable to the mobility and transport and automotive ecosystem, and can feed and inspire the preparation of the recovery plans and of the specific projects behind to address these country-specific recommendation challenges. You have here more details per country, and if you go here on this platform, you would find more practical examples in each state for 2019 and 2020 in this important documentation. There's also a link, and that's important in the case of this ecosystem, with the National Energy and Climate Plan. Here you see again that there are some documentation available which illustrate how national energy and climate plans have been assessed and examined already in the past, applied to the automotive transport and mobility ecosystem, and how you can find there some good practices examples. So I have abstracted the last report and communication of the Commission on the National Climate and Energy Plans, which has assessed the 28 plans at that in 2019. And you can see that Austria and Spain was referred, for instance, as providing good examples on emission reduction objectives for the transport sectors, but also Italy, where you could find details, and Slovenia with concrete measures. So this shows the example of some countries, but can also be used, of course, by other countries to get to some good examples and good practices on how to provide these facts, figures, and feed this evidence-based exercise. If you go on the topics, objectives and measures and actions which are illustrated by the member states in their national climate and energy plans, it's also very interesting. You can see example on directions and objectives on zero and low emission vehicles, specific actions for buses and rails also, and shipping. And you have also some elements on overall public transport projects and measures, in particular on sustainable mobility plans. a lot of things on transport innovation. You can see that all member states refer to that, and taxation measures. Behind that, in the national climate and energy plans, you would find objectives, action plans, and some projects, and that was already discussed and illustrated in the past. And assets by the Commission can be very useful to look at. I will go to the second part, where I have tried to give you some elements linking to the industrial ecosystem dimension based on the second guidance which has been issued by the Commission on the RRF mid-September, which is very practical and consists in a template of the form which will be filled out by the member states when detailing their measures. So that's the framework for the submission of the plan, and I will try to illustrate here how it linked to the industrial ecosystem of transport, mobility, and automotive when their projects are at stake. You can see here that kind of overall pictures. Of course, we cannot give, the funds have not been pre-allocated. There will be a full assessment from scratch of all the projects which will be presented together with the measures submitted by the member states in their plan on reform and investment. This slide shows the reality on the field as projected until 2030 and 2050, and you can see linking to what we just described in the objectives and linking to the country-specific recommendations, how it could be translated at the level of the industry and the ecosystem. We have this objective in terms of a reduction of emissions, connection and automation of the vehicles, and it links to smart mobility, 5G, artificial intelligence, big data, consumer behaviors, but also batteries, hydrogen, and future-proof technologies, which are expressly referred to in the recharge and refuel priorities. Also infrastructure like connecting and refueling charging infrastructures, which are very important. All these will contribute to this growth and job creation, to zero emissions, zero fatalities, and linked to the priorities which we have mentioned earlier. So that's how there would be projects behind all these elements, which will in turn contribute to each member state's plans, which will in turn be assessed against these objectives and priorities, and give rise to the implementation of this facility in practice. How is it required to fill out the templates for submissions of a project behind and the measures by the member states? The Commission has provided a set of documents called templates, component templates to be more precise, and behind each component which has to be completed and filled out in this template, you will find a different priority, including, for instance, the recharge and components feeding the recharge and refuel priorities, which I mentioned earlier. And for the mobility, transport, and automotive ecosystem, where some of the projects are at stake, it would mean that they will have to fit with the requirement here, which is that the planned investments and reforms would have to be described very precisely. There should be also detailed information about the stakeholders involved, including those of the business, the SMEs, the sectors, the students, so university was involved, the workers, and what is targeted. the means of implementation, coordination aspect, how it is swift, how it will be swiftly implemented, will meet the dates which I mentioned earlier, and will give rise to tangible milestones on the field are very important. There is a need for a timeline, but also for milestones and targets, so KPIs. The nature, size, and challenges are addressed are very important, and also how it concretely impact the green and digital transition, but also strengthen the economic and social resilience. For this, there are only 10 pages, so it's very important to have a dialogue where all key things and key information on this are flagged as really supporting and evidencing how the country-specific recommendations will be addressed for each country, and how the priorities and these priority areas, which I mentioned specifically for the mobility, transport, and automotive ecosystems are addressed. So refuel and recharge, the skilling and upskilling, the priority on digital and green transition. And that's important to have a dialogue already with the member states, if possible, to give the relevant and targeted information behind that. You see here, then I have abstracted a set of tables which shows practically how this will be indicated by all the member states through this table. This one is specifically addressing the green and digital impact, and you see that the member states will have to provide some indication on how much they think the green objectives are met in percentage, what is the intervention field, and confirm that the do not significant harm purpose is met. The challenges and the digital objectives will have to be made more precise here. There are also other tables which the member states will have to fill out, which are these milestones and targets I mentioned earlier. The one which is illustrated in the current template deals with education and digital skills and digital learning. You can see that what is interesting here is to see that the KPIs can be very specific. We have some here in the rural areas. Applied to the transport, automotive, and mobility sector, it can be very specific, but you already find some existing targets and milestones in the country reports of the European semester, which I mentioned earlier. For instance, there are some indicators on greenhouse emissions linked to the estimate per new vehicles on the market. That can be one milestone to be mentioned here in relation with refuel and recharge. There would be a very important requirement on estimated cost and funding, and that's very important for that member states have finalized their estimate, have linked them to the projects on the ground, and can support them with tangible elements resulting from the calls from projects. So I mentioned earlier that there should be only 10 pages, but any other evidence or annexes can be provided. So in particular for the estimate of costs and funding, this can be considered for specific big projects in the ecosystem if necessary. The same for the quantitative impact, which has to be illustrated. You see here in terms of contribution to GDP, so to growth, employment, and also for the qualitative impact, which has to be described and summarized. And that's very important for the assessment phase, to have this clearly described in relation to how it contributes to the green and digital transition, in particular to the industrial strategy, to economic and social resilience, and there could be some tangible examples of big project or strategic project behind given. That's would be very interesting. What is key also is to work on risk and challenges and to make some work on how any existing risk, particularly for the timeline or because an investment on innovation is particularly risky, for instance, how this is construed and how this is tackled by the member states and the stakeholders to make sure that there is implementation within this very short timeline I mentioned earlier, ending 2027. So thank you very much. I tried to give you as many sources and information and concrete elements as possible based on the existing, and I hope we can further discuss. We are available, of course, for any other questions you may have. Thank you.
You are very welcome, Morgan. Thank you to you for so detailed explanation. I am sure that there are many questions. I will start with one or two. Okay, just to open the floor. First of all, speaking of about the process, okay. So we understand that the different countries are now working on the recovery plans, and they will be able to present it then to the Commission from 15, so this week, starting this week. Which will be the process? Are the Commission reviewing and negotiating every aspect of the proposals until end of April next year, or it will be evaluated at the end?
So,
Sorry, I cannot hear you.
do you hear me now?
Yes, now, yes.
So, as I mentioned in the first slides here, what is very important to get is that this would take place in the context of the European semester dialogue, which is already existing and following a calendar of discussion and negotiation. I would not refer to negotiation. That's a dialogue through which the Commission and the Member States discuss together around the table on how the challenges which are identified for growth, job, and now economic and social resilience and green and digital transition are addressed. And where there would be an assessment and which would follow a dialogue and let's say it will be part of discussion and question and answer process. So based on these templates I mentioned, so it is starting. It has already started in that the member states did submit their plan. I mean, they announced their plan, sorry. So that was on this second timeline I showed. Now, starting this week, they will start to submit these templates I described in the second part of the presentation for the components. And the final deadline will be would be April 2021 if confirmed by the vote, which I mentioned earlier, which will take place in January. And then the assessment will be done internally at the level of the Commission based on the governance which is set up. So starting April 2021, the measures could be on the ground.
Thank you. And another question: when you say component, because you have repeated that there are a limit of 10 pages by component. Could you give us examples of components?
I did not hear your last question.
Could you give us examples of components just to be sure that we understand the same for component? 10 pages by component. What is a component?
So as I explained, there is a lot of freedom and by the member states, and the projects are demand driven, but one can expect that the components would fall under these priority areas here. So we have already issued these guidelines. So the first document I mentioned, do you see my screen?
Yes, yes,
okay.
yes, we are seeing, yes.
In this guidance, you have some more information on what components are, but of course, each member state has a level of freedom in establishing their plans, as they already do in the framework of the European semester for reform plans, and as they did for the national climate and energy plans. But one can expect that there would be a component behind each of these areas here, which means that the granularity is quite big, as you can see, if you think about the amount I mentioned earlier. But as I mentioned here, it's also provided in the guidance that annexes are welcome, particularly on the qualitative assessment, and on the cost estimates, so for investment and reforms. If we speak of, let's assume that we have projects in research and innovation in the automotive sector, or in the rail sector, or in the shipping sector. Of course, given the amounts at stake, one has to confront this, the annex, what has to be provided, I mean, against the big amounts which are at stake. But one could think that some projects behind flagship areas like here can be described in the annexes in more detail, including compilation of compiled projects. You already have some good examples, for instance, on how it can be structured at the level of the member states, which have announced their plan already. So I mentioned Spain, France. There are also some examples for Italy.
Okay, thank you, thank you. I will open now the floor for everyone who could ask or comment on what has been said. Who is the first? Are there any?
Hi, good morning. This is Alberto Cominges from Spain, from the Galician automotive cluster. I have two questions. Well, the first one is to understand well the word mobility. If I understood okay, you are taking into account also shipping, I mean, maybe naval industry, probably airplanes, I mean, which is exactly, I mean, the scope of mobility. So I don't know, maybe it's also, I know, bicycles. I am not able to figure out if it's too wide the definition or and the second question is what is the role of the regions if they have one in this place? So thank you.
Excuse me, I did not get the second part. What is the role of the regions?
Of the regions? Yes.
Of the regions, okay. So these are two different questions. I did a presentation on the 29th of September on what is behind the ecosystem So it's indeed a wide notion which covers shipping, rail, all means of transport, airplane also, and of course all cars and vehicles, including bikes. It's also going to services, so like the car leasing, the bus leasing, financial providers are involved. So the whole value chain and the whole supply chain is considered in this ecosystem. That's for the first question. Did I answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. For the second one, and that's made clear both in the original communication and the draft regulation, the proposal which is currently under discussion. It's very clear that all levels of member states can be concerned, but it's each member state which will submit their plans. Member state by member state, so there would be one submission per member state along the templates I described earlier, which means that one can find in these forms, which will be filled out for each component by the member states, some regional project. If you want to find examples which already exist, you could think, for instance, of Belgium, where you have already some examples on the reform plans which were submitted, or national climate and energy plans, where you find illustrations of what is done for Flanders and Wallonia, for instance. So you could think that for the automotive ecosystem, in the same manner, there are some regional projects or regional dimensions which are described. That's actually anticipated and included in the proposal, but it requires very good coordination between the stakeholders on the ground, so the ultimate beneficiaries, for instance, in the industry, the regional authorities which will be concerned, and the coordinating authorities at the level of the member states, each member state being in charge of this coordination process. But already existing in the EU semester, you already find this coordination process in the European semester. Did I answer your question? Or do you have an other?
Yes, thank you, Morgan.
So thank you, Alberto and Morgan. Any other question or comment?
Good morning, Antonio. I don't know with your phone if you see the chat, but there's a question from Elina. Maybe she wants to comment.
Elina? Yes,
Thank you. Good morning to all. My question was referring particularly to this ecosystem of transport, mobility, automotive, and more exactly, to what extent do you consider that this ecosystem requires the integration of the respective sectors from the neighborhood countries? Thank you.
So the purpose is to address all priorities and flagship areas which I have mentioned for the EU. I'm not aware at this stage of particular examples for the transport, mobility, and automotive ecosystem, but of course any involvement of stakeholders from neighborhood countries, if contributing to one member state project or reforms or investment, or if having impact and if contributing to this outcome we mentioned earlier, which have to be established, could be considered. Now, the resilience facility is targeting the member states, the 27 member states, reform and investment in these member states, and they have the hands, they have the responsibility, but also the initiatives of all the projects, measures, and investment behind. And it's at the level of each member state that this is prepared, elaborated, and submitted. And it will be, of course, be discussed in this context at the level of the European semester.
So this supposes that the initiative should come from the part of the member states, as I understand.
Yes. Yes.
So it does not leave very much space for the initiatives from the neighborhood countries.
The neighborhood countries will not submit plans them as neighborhood countries in the context of the resilient recovery facility. There may be other tools which would address them, but for the amounts at stake here and for the plans and reforms at stake, this deal with member states' plans and reforms.
Okay, at least it is clear. Thank you.
But I'm speaking just on one very important tool that with the amounts we mentioned earlier, which is the recovery and resilience facility. Yeah? It's only one tool.
Yeah.
Thank you, Morgan. I have another question. There is a specific recommendation on the policy tools to deliver this funding to the market. There are specific recommendation on how to support the projects with the enterprises as funding or as common investment. I don't know. Are there any recommendation, or is everything depending of every state?
There are no specific recommendations. As I mentioned earlier already in July, when the Council met and had this political agreement on this recovery and resilience facility, they encourage the Commission to accelerate and facilitate the procedures in member states. But the way each member state is proceeding remains specific to each member state, and it's very much driven by particularities in each member state. But still, what can dialogue with the industry, with the stakeholders, the unions, the workers, by the way, already in place in principle in the context of the European semester, is encouraged. So that's strongly encouraged. And we have examples like in Spain, you have the Forum of the Automotive, so Mesa de Automación, I think, sorry for my, my accent. And also in France, for instance, you have example of filière de compétitivité, where we know that there are forums of discussions on the plans already for the transport, mobility, and automotive ecosystem, which have been initiated and set up by the member states, but are very welcome, of course. I don't know if it's answering your question or if you wanted more examples. Of course, there are also some. It's important also to given what I presented. I think that you all have an idea now of the size, the magnitude which means that the projects to be presented by the industry, if they are, let's say, packed and very clear and mature and compiled and aggregated amounts along the same directions and logic, which we could see, for instance, on these slides, it would be, of course, very well fitting with the spirit and the dynamic of this facility. And it will also be very promising if it's done this way in terms of maturity and success of implementation, which is key. For innovation, what I would say, I would insist on the timeline, because you could see that it's really 21-27. So I think that's an important point to take into consideration. And of course, SMEs are mentioned, and there's a strong encouragement to establish also, as part of submitting the plans, that they are involved. You can find some examples and assessment on good practices in the national climate and energy plans. That's what I mentioned here. I thought it was interesting. And you can see behind how these countries in particular worked with the stakeholders in the field to reach a good presentation and a good practice.
Okay, any more questions?
Yes, Antonio, can I make a very short question to Morgan about the following? The automotive clusters in Europe usually have the big multinationals, the medium companies of components, startups, universities, and things like that. How do you think that this recovery plan will promote better the connection between these kind of companies, especially the multinationals and the national companies? Because as you know, you have lots of multinationals from different countries that are in the European regions, and it is very important to clarify which kind of support these multinationals can have towards the implementation they have in the region or the country.
If I may reformulate your question, because I'm not sure I got all your words, sorry. I understand that you refer to the multinational and companies which may be the ultimate beneficiaries of the plans.
Yes, that's right.
So to be clear, the national member states plans will have some components which address needs in terms of investments, in particular, changes, innovation, manufacturing, reorganization, jobs creation, skilling, digitalization. So these multinationals will have the benefit of the national plans from this perspective. That's the situation. And behind that, there would be, what's happening currently is that there would be in each member states projects identified by the member states which fit with national strategies, national plans. And behind that, the member states will compile information, the data around and along the components I described, with the elements to establish the evidence and facts to establish, which I mentioned earlier. And if this is assessed as meeting the objectives and of the facility, April, it will be decided starting April, but as I said, we are waiting for the final confirmation of the calendar based on the vote in January. But 21-22, there will be 70% of the funds disbursed, which means that with a pre-financing of 10%, so in 2021, to the member states. And then once member states can establish that the targets and milestones they have provided in the plan. So for instance, which means that behind these projects you have in the industry, there should also be specific targets and KPIs and milestones, as I explained earlier. Once it will be reported that they are met, the member states will receive the funds. So the member states in many countries, I assume, would finance and accept, they would accept the projects first. They will call for the projects, they will accept the projects, they will compile them and present them. The financing will take place at national level. And if there is a positive assessment from the Commission, then the member states will be partially financed back by the Commission for these projects. Did I answer your question?
Yes, thank you very much. It was very good. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, thank you. I see that, yes, for sure, we will share, if Morgan agrees, we will share the presentation in the ECCP, okay? I understand, Morgan, that you don't have any problem for us sharing this presentation?
Yeah, I think we can share it. I will double check with my hierarchy, but normally, yeah, we will share this presentation. As I said, this is, I try really to compile and abstract things which are public and made for the citizens and the stakeholders and the member states. So for sure,
excellent. It's an excellent and very clear summary. Congratulations. So if you agree, we will wait for your approval, okay? But we will share the presentation in the ECCP. The only question is that it could take some time, just days, okay? As the video.
No,
okay.
I will give you feedback today, Antonio, so that you can.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
I think the answer will be positive.
Thank you. Okay, I see that Claudia, I don't see the video, but Claudia Supan is sharing a video on YouTube. Could you comment, Claudia?
Yes, thank you very much.
Welcome.
Hi, thank you very much for giving me this chance to inform you. This week is we are organizing, the Automotive Intergroup of the Committee of the Regions. We are organizing the Green Transformation Summit of Automotive Regions with Commissioner Hahn. And it is a political discussion with Commissioner Hahn and political leaders from 2 Spanish regions, from a Slovak and a Czech region, and someone from Germany will be there as well, and from Austria, and experts from industry. So we will have someone from Klepa and from Scania talking on how to manage this green transformation. I've just put in a link in the chat. So it's open on YouTube on Wednesday, 14:30, so 2:30, for 1.5 hours, and it's open for everyone via this link. And it would be really nice to have you there. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing with us, Claudia, and I'm sure we will be there, some of them for sure. Thank you for sharing that information.
Thank you.
Okay, I think that we have time for any last question to Morgan or comment.
Well, I have one more question. Yes, this is Alberto. Morgan, I understand that well, I am not very familiar with what is coming next regarding grants at the European Commission. I don't know if we are talking about more or less the same mechanisms of grants and the intensity of the financial aids. They are gonna be more or less the same that we have before, or the intensity, taking into account the pandemic and everything, will change dramatically. I don't know if you could provide us with some knowledge regarding this matter.
So in this slide, which this presentation was targeting the Recovery and Resilience Facility after we discussed with Antonio that this would be of particular interest for you. In terms of, so the amounts are unprecedented, and as you, and behind that, there's an allocation key for each member state. The allocation key is based on the impact on the GDP of the crisis. It's also based on the territory and the unemployment rate for the past. You would find details here. If you need detail for each member state, I could not elaborate on it. But in terms of amounts, yes, the pandemic, the impact of the pandemic crisis will be taken into consideration. The member states' plans reflect higher amounts than in total. I mean, so far, for the member states who have published their plans, the total amounts of their plans are higher than their what is allocated to them under this amount. Which means, which gives an idea of how big it is and how unprecedented it is to address the crisis. If we compare to other continents, I think Europe is really extremely well positioned from this perspective and is tackling this seriously. What is also important is that the way it is done, the way it has been packaged, and the way I try to present today in terms of submitting plans, having them assessed and putting them on the ground is such that this should be hopefully extremely quickly subject to the vote and adoption in January, but should be extremely quickly on the ground. With targeting companies and SMEs. So what is very important, again, is to participate in coordination and all the forums of discussions at the level of your respective member states to get to identify who is coordinating and who is coordinating, how it is organized for your industry. But behind that, it should very much quickly be financed and be on the ground when assessed and approved. And the first step and the ownership is with the member states. That's why also it should lead to targeted and tailored implementation, addressing the needs of the stakeholders and of the heat regions, heat industries and heat regions on the ground.
And here is where we can play a role, the clusters, I mean. I think that we can be a critical agent on the generation and coordination of proposal, also in the implementation, and a quick implementation, in fact. So thank you, Morgan. If there are no other questions, I think it's the moment to close. But this is open to new sessions. I don't know if Morgan will be with us or not, but anyway, it's in our interest to continue speaking about this if you want. So don't hesitate to contact us, to contact me with your suggestion for next steps. And as we said, so that is a extremely important and interesting moment, and the opportunity is good for our companies. They need to go ahead. They need to rebuild their capacities, and this is the funding that could help really them to do it in the proper way. Thank you again, Morgan, for the excellent presentation and for all your support in informing us about the details. And you are everyone invited to join us during the next session. That is, it will be about the creative and cultural industrial ecosystem next Wednesday.
Thank you, Antonio. Thank you. It was my pleasure.
Very welcome. You are very welcome. So thank you, everybody, and see you soon, I hope. Bye.
Bye bye. Thank you.